Senator from Utah is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I had originally anticipated speaking for 15 minutes. I understand that a speaker intruded into the Republicans' time, for which I do not complain, but I ask unanimous consent that I be allowed 15 minutes, even though the time would normally expire at 3 o'clock.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate that and the courtesy of my colleagues. I have two issues I wish to discuss today. The first one is one that I have talked about before, which is the DISCLOSE Act, which we're going to be voting on probably tomorrow. And the last time I talked about the DISCLOSE Act, I raised the issue of the films that were made in the 2008 campaign, the film, rather, that was made in the 2008 campaign by Michael Moore. This was an effort, very clearly, on the part of Mr. Moore to influence the election. No one can have seen that film without realizing that it was a serious attempt to make sure that Americans did not vote for President George W. Bush. Well, Citizens United, a group that has political views different than Mr. Moore's, believed that the film violated the law. And they filed a complaint with the Federal Election Commission because they said it was clearly a political document, not just another movie, and it was filmed for the purpose of trying to affect the election. At the time, Michael Moore had this to say about Citizens United and their complaint, and I quote, "That's the difference between our side and their side. Even when we disagree, we're respectful of freedom of speech. But when they disagree, they try to shut you down. Well, it's un-American, and it's wrong, and people are not going to stand for it. People in this country don't like to be told they can't watch something or see something." End of quote. Well, I could argue with Mr. Moore about whether or not our side really does hate freedom of speech. But the interesting point is that he insisted that we have more opportunities to watch rather than less opportunities to watch, and that any other position was, to use his term, un-American. Well, what did Citizens United do? They decided rather than fight Michael Moore, they would join him. And they made a movie. And they ran the movie in the 2008 election. And immediately they were attacked for running this movie, or for making this movie, because unlike Michael Moore, Citizens United, as a group, happens to have a corporate charter. They're a corporation by definition, and the complaint was, you're entering the campaign and violating the law which says corporations cannot contribute to political parties. And Citizens United took the case all the way to the Supreme Court and said, but we're not contributing to a political party. We're not violating the law against corporate contributions. We are exercising our free amendment right to make a movie and tell people what we happen to think about Hillary Clinton. Their views about Hillary Clinton were no more generous than Mr. Moore's views about President Bush. I haven't seen either movie. I don't particularly care to at this point. The issue is, does Citizens United have the same right for freedom of speech that Michael Moore does? Or is the technicality of the fact that Citizens United happens to be a corporation and Michael Moore is rich enough to make his movie by himself without a corporate form and without shareholders mean that he can speak and they cannot? And the Supreme Court said no. We won't support that idea that he can speak and they cannot. And as long as they're not making a direct contribution to a party, that would be a violation of the law. They have the right to make a movie, and they have the right to distribute it. Well, that's what the DISCLOSE Act attempts to do something about. We've heard complaints on this floor, oh, it's evil and improper for corporations to speak. Unless, of course, they happen to be the New York Times Corporation. They can speak all they want. Or the Washington Post Corporation, they can speak all they want. But if a group of citizens get together and they have some shareholders and say, we want to speak in the political arena, they're told, no, 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 you can't, except by the Supreme Court, who says, yes, 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 you can. And that's why I support the Supreme Court decision. All right, we get the DISCLOSE Act to say the Supreme Court made a terrible mistake, but we'll do everything we can to try to rectify that mistake. And we're told over and over again, we're not limiting their freedom of speech. We are just going for disclosure. And then there are all kinds of aspects of the bill that go beyond disclosure. And we're treating everybody alike, except those groups that we have carved out of the terms of the DISCLOSE Act so that they won't have to comply with the DISCLOSE Act. And those happen to be the kinds of groups whose support are necessary for the people who voted for this bill in the House. All right, let's assume, for the sake of argument, that there are things in the Supreme Court decision that do need some legislative attention. Why then don't we have some hearings? Why then don't we have the bill open for amendment? I'm the ranking member of the Senate Rules Committee, the committee that would receive jurisdiction on this bill, and we have not seen it in the Rules Committee. It has not been referred to committee. There have been no hearings. There's been no opportunity for amendment. There's been no opportunity to sandpaper some of the rough places and make the bill more acceptable to people who are currently opposed to it. It's simply passed the House in this fashion. Let's bring it to the floor of the Senate in the way it passed the House and prevent the Senate from having any impact on the way it's worded or the way it's structured. And so, Mr. President, for two reasons, I'm going to vote against the DISCLOSE Act. Number one, I happen to believe that the Supreme Court got it right, and that Citizens United has every bit as much right to produce a movie that attacks a political character as Michael Moore does. And the technical fact that he does it as an individual should not change the importance of the dialogue that should take place in the public square. And number two, even if the Supreme Court decision does need some kind of legislative fix, it should be handled in regular order. We should have seen it in the Rules Committee. We should have had an opportunity to amend it, to debate it, to hear witnesses on it, to question those witnesses, and have an understanding of it. And for those two reasons, I intend to vote against it. Now, Mr. President, turning my attention very quickly to the issue that the senator from Arizona was discussing, which has to do with tax policy, I want to call the attention of my colleagues to an article that appeared in the Wall Street Journal on the 21st of September with respect to capital gains taxation and the impact of seeing the capital gains tax rate go up on the economy. The headline of the article is "Cap Gains Taxation, Less Means More," and I ask unanimous consent that the entire article be included in the record at the conclusion of my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I will highlight only one portion of this article in the interest of time, and it's the point that is made as the final point in the article where it says, and I quote, "Higher capital gains taxes will not substantially reduce the deficit," close quote. They point out, we've all seen it, that the higher the capital gains tax goes, many times the lower the capital gains tax revenues. Why is that? Because if you have an investment in a business or a piece of real estate and the cost of getting out of that investment is inordinately high because of a capital gains tax rate, you won't be as motivated to get your money out of that investment and put it into a more productive one than you would be if the capital gains tax were low. We've all known that. The economic information on that has been around for a long time. But there's another aspect to this that I want to highlight, and that is the impact on jobs. The figure that they use in this article is that if the capital gains tax rate went to zero, the loss to the Treasury in terms of income would be $23 billion a year. You say, oh, that's a lot of money. We can't afford to lose $23 billion a year coming into the Treasury. What impact would that have on the deficit? we would lose $23 billion a year that we need. All right, let's assume that the $23 billion comes in. What does this administration propose to do with it? They want to put it in a stimulus package to create jobs. And they would spend the entire $23 billion just as rapidly as it came in. It would go out in a stimulus effort to create jobs. And the point made in the article is that by not taking in that $23 billion and leaving it in the economy, we are giving the economy itself and those people who are in the business of creating jobs $23 billion in incentives to create jobs. And if I can quote the last paragraph, it says, a capital gains, quote, a capital gains tax reduction to zero produces new jobs at the cost of $18,000 per worker, far less than might occur from many other proposals, close quote. In other words, if the government took in the $23 billion and then spent it in an incentive to create jobs, they would spend more than $18,000 per job than would happen if we simply left that money in the hands of the people who know how to create jobs. I'm not suggesting a capital gains tax rate of zero, but I am certainly suggesting that we leave the capital gains tax rate at the level where it is, because it is the most efficient way to create new jobs in this economy, rather than having it come into the government and then having the government hand it out in ways that have been proven to be less effective in the creation of new jobs than the reality of the economy working on its own. So those are my two messages, Mr. President. I appreciate the opportunity of sharing them today. Number one, let's defeat the DISCLOSE Act. And number two, let's leave the tax program where it is, because that's the most efficient and effective way to create new jobs, and new jobs is what we want and need in this economy more than any other.